Welcome, everyone, to this SOLA Community Call. We are very excited to present Marge Levy and Farrol Mertes talking about Coille McLaughlin Hooven. And specifically, Farrol is a end-of-career doula, working with artists at the end of their careers. And she's been working with artists for over 30 years. Her commitment is to the artistic process and the end of career solutions for the artist and the family's needs. And Farrol acts as a detective, sorting the material and searching for the unknown and under-recognized aspects of the artist's life. She acts as an archivist, a collection manager, and in some cases as an art trustee, connecting the dots and individualizing the approach. Each artist and client's goals are on a case-by-case basis, and their wishes are as individual as the artists themselves. So that is a brief introduction of Farrol Mertes, and I will back up just a little bit and tell you a little bit about SOLA. SOLA, as I admit a couple other people, SOLA stands for Support of Old Lady Artists, and it was ideated in 2016 by artist and founder Jenny Ruffner. Jenny is an internationally recognized artist and saw that there were so many peers in her community that just weren't receiving the recognition that they deserved, and they were women. So in her effort to spiral up in a generous way and give back to the community and use her platform, she started SOLA with one individual unrestricted cash award for $1,000 in 2017 that went to Gloria Bornstein. And it has grown since then. In the time since 2017, we have been able to support artists in an amount of $77,000. And we thank everyone that has been able to come along on this ride with us, including you all tonight. So I do want to make sure to acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples, and we recognize that they are the first peoples of the land, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaquamish, and Muckleshoot peoples.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yeah. So, Marge, would you like to take it from here?
I can do that.
Thank you.
And I see many of you on the screen who I know, and some of you know Coille probably better than I do. I see a babysitter that knew Coille a long, long time ago, who was her student and babysat for her children. So we have some longtime friends. I met Coille in 1980 when I took some time off from my Midwest job and went to the California College of Arts and Crafts. And I was helping them develop some new programs. And I had heard of Coille, and I worked in clay, and I knew she did. And I sought her out, and she said she wanted to have nothing to do with the program, but would I stay for lunch? So that's how it first started. Her children were teenagers. And I looked in her studio and I saw the productivity that just blew me away. And over the years, we developed a friendship very unique for me because we both were able to tap the child in us and grow through it and just have enormous amounts of fun. Um, about maybe 15 years ago, a little longer than that, I was with her and she said, "You know, remember when you met my mother and father a number of years ago?" Yeah. "Well, do you remember that my mother wasn't quite with it, that she had some cognitive issues?" And I said, yes. And she said, well, I think I've inherited that. And I have some cognitive issues, and I don't know where they're going to go or what they're going to do. But my therapist says I should tell everybody. Well, I at first thought she was kidding because she was as lively and wonderful as ever. But over the years, I realized that there was a cognitive decline, which she's gone through as gracefully, I think, as anyone could, with the same humor and imagination and charm that she always did. She's now in a memory care residence in Berkeley, where she has lived a big part of her life. Her children are all adults. And at some point, she was like all of us are. She had lots of files, she had lots of pots. She wanted to make something new, but she and her husband, Peter, realized that she'd had an amazing career. And they they found someone to help Coelle clean up her office. I mean, that was the first thing that they did. And the second amazing thing that they did was meet Farrol. And Farrol has been a friend of the art, a friend of the artist. She's held hands with Coelle, with me, with the whole family, and has helped this sort of end of career kind of work that needs to happen. And she's going to show us some slides so we can get to know and see Coelle's work. But she's also going to tell us some of the things that she has done, which are breathtaking and amazing. And I just want to embarrass her by saying I have never met anyone who was so understanding and so supportive of an artist in a way that was appropriate to that artist. It's a real pleasure to introduce Farrol. And Farrol, why don't you take it from here? And you can talk about meeting Coelle and where that started and where it went and what's happening to it now. And if there are any questions or observations, I may just kind of go, and then you'll know. Will that work?
That sounds marvelous. Okay,
Okay.
that's good. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Marge. Thank you, everyone at SOLA and everyone who's in this room with us today. This is marvelous. And so I'm honored to be here. And my talk today is going to be a discussion about Coelle's Legacy Project, the path she ventured to achieve her three primary goals, and to share part of Coelle's overall story. Her three goals when she started this in 2008 was to get a retrospective at a major institution, was to get a piece accepted into the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where her great aunt Mary Louise McLaughlin also has work, because she's also a renowned potter from Cincinnati. And her third was to create an archive and get it accepted to the Archives of American Art. So those were the goals. So when she started this in 2008, she brought on 3 women overall for the whole project throughout this span of time, which still to this day I'm working on. Even though the studio is closed, the house is sold, and Coelle has moved into a memory care, I'm still working with the family and I still have material. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation, and Marge and I are just going to have an overall discussion. The 2 banners behind me, you'll see those at some point in the PowerPoint presentation. They're part of a group of 4 banners that I developed, designed, and created, but you'll see those later on in the PowerPoint. I thought I just wanted Coelle in the room with us. And at some point in the PowerPoint, I'm going to have a short audio of Coelle's voice, because I also wanted her voice in this presentation. I want her as present as I can bring her to this room. So at this time, I'm going to do a share screen. and we'll take it from here.
And while you're doing that, Farrol, I'll just tell everyone, if you have questions that you would like to ask for Farrol, if we have time at the end, then please put them in the chat and we'll check them later.
So here we have just the beginning, celebrating Coille. Coille has had an amazing life, and this legacy project journey was something that sort of came about not just from all the material she had in her office, but it was also, she had made her final piece. It was called Ready or Not. And Peter, her husband, was retiring, and she felt, what am I going to do with all this? And so it began. So here's Coille in 1974 at her studio. This pot is a very famous teapot, stacked. We still have this teapot. It's in bits and pieces, but I'm hoping one day it can be resurrected. And this photograph, I think, is one of the most amazing photographs of Coille. And then a statement. Marge, do you feel like reading the statement?
I could. Meaning evolves as I work on a piece. It comes from my inner dialogue and the physical act of working with the clay. Similar to a dream, the finished piece has layers of literal, surreal, and personal meaning. It creates a feeling that lingers, and my desire is to reflect the pleasures and struggles of being human. What a fortunate calling it is to be an artist, to participate in a creative flow. As I coax the birth of a new piece, I'm also filled with surprise and wonder at how a lump of clay has become so expressive of exactly what I didn't realize I was trying to convey. From 2013.
I love that quote. We got involved a lot with her writings, so we quite often went through her journals, and those writings became part of the map that ended up being used in her book, in the outreach and the website, and then also for curators and historians as they were coming in and reviewing the work. And then if there was a specific piece mentioned in a quote, I made sure that that quote walked with the piece if it got donated somewhere, just as if there was original ephemera where a piece was represented in a flyer or in a publication, and we had that original material. I made sure that material also walked with the piece to the institution. So this is Chef's Trophy, one of Coille's best pieces. It sold early on, and this went to Deborah and Melvin Newmark of New York City. And I believe she only made one final piece from these chef's hats, but she did end up having left over some chef's hats and some of the creatures, but there was only one piece that was made. I love this piece. This is Pregnant Girl. This went to MAD after the retrospective, and you'll see it later on. I've got images of the exhibition. These are finger puppets. Coille was famous for her finger puppets. You can actually take these off and wear them as fingers, puppets. Coille had, I believe there were 3 aprons left that were in the studio, and they had some damage to them. We were able to get one of those restored, and that went to a private collection because I felt that the work was so important. And then later on, when there was an open studio at the end, the family ended up gifting the remaining pieces that had existed but were broken. So as I mentioned, Mary Louise McLaughlin is part of the family. She passed away actually the year that Coille was born. And I felt that that was important to Coille's work with porcelain, Coille's work to the commitment of family. And you'll see the vases here. The one on the far right is the blue vase that's in the Met. The other vase, the taller vase, is at the Cincinnati Art Museum. And Mary Louise McLaughlin had extensive patents that I found later. So at times I would manage Coille's social media Facebook page. And so I would develop a campaign based on whatever was needed at that time to put some news flash out, or to represent Mary Louise McLaughlin on her birthday or her mother's birthday, or just a family member participating in something. So I would quite often do research into other arenas for Coille to try and bring further depth into her story as we moved forward. So here's something that I ended up putting on Facebook. I took one of Coille's old flyers from the 70s and I put it up against Mary Louise McLaughlin's from the 1890. So that is something I ended up putting on Facebook by putting those two together. So we saved every single one of Coille's original open studio flyers, and those are going in the archives. So one thing that was very helpful for this whole project and what she wanted to develop was that Coille saved everything, everything. There were stacks of receipts. There were stacks, numerous boxes of mailing lists. There was her marketing material. There were photographs. There were slides. There's correspondence. There's stacks of rejection letters. There's letters coming from individuals saying, I saw something and I want one. You know, you just never knew. So it was always a deep dive into something. And here's Coille in her studio. And this is an important piece because in the forefront, you'll see the Coille, the pot, the two-headed teapot. That's the teapot called Coille's teapot. And that's a famous teapot because it ended up in the retrospective and it's now at the Museum of Arts and Design's permanent collection. And you'll see there's other works in this photograph that are also in permanent collection, but this is an important photograph in that regard. This is one of the first public venues where Coille went out and was at the San Francisco Street Fair that was very popular. And she met a number of collectors for the first time who later became clients, who then would move into attending her open studios. At that time, they were just studio sales. And this is the house. This is the studio. And I love this wonderful antiquated Polaroid photograph. And it just, to me, told the story of the beginning stages. So in turn, she ended up getting a grant in 1975 and started construction on it. So I took these 3 Polaroids and used them on Facebook. And that was part of my promotional material as we were moving forward into the retrospective. This is the kiln that Coille built in the studio. So just to start with, I can just have a conversation around with the timeline. Coille started in 2008. And she started by creating a list of individuals to have a conversation with about how does one build a legacy. And they were from curators to historians to writers to friends to artists to everybody and anybody she knew. And that's how it began. So she brought in a woman by the name of Earlene Taylor who helped her organize the office. And that was the first stage of where this started. And then it was, I think, maybe 6-7 months later, I met Coille through a mutual friend of ours, Carol Austin, who I knew from the San Francisco Craft and Folk Art Museum. She was the curator, and she also knew Coille. And they met and knew each other through the Berkeley Artist Women's Group. It's a morning breakfast group that meets once a month. And the group is dozens of Bay Area female artists. And she was asking for a referral, and Carol referred me. So I stepped in to start the process of organizing slides, correspondence, and doing this all chronologically. So that's where that started. So it was the ephemera. It was organizing the magazines that she had, the books that she had. And then that was about 2 years of work for me. And then I stepped away in 2010 because I was offered a job at a startup company. Difficult decision, but I did make it. So at that time, she did take a small break when I took that position. And then a few months later, she hired another person by the name of Abigail Lloyd. Abigail Lloyd came in and continued the work that I was doing. And then Abigail started the development of the book and the first website. And so in that, they reached out to Jenny Sorkin, who wrote the essay. Joe Laurie and Leslie Farron wrote the back dust cover commentary. And she hired Steve Kahn, a professional photographer, and they started this process of creating a book that she was hoping to use for promotion, because the book that we started was just literally Xeroxes that was coil bound. And that's where she started sending those out, but was getting rejected. So we stopped that process, and she then went this other direction with Abigail. And then it continued. And then Abigail and Coille worked on, well, a script, I guess you could call it. She was invited to talk at NCCA's panel for moving forward, archiving your career. And they created a script and a commentary for Coille, and that was in 2013. And at this time is when the family really started to notice Coille was forgetting people as they came into the room, forgetting introductions. So there was an awareness. And Marge, you may know the timeline better in terms of when that diagnosis actually came through.
I think it was 2012, maybe. I just remember Coille told me that her daughter. Can you go back on the Macy's side? Because I just wanted to talk about that. But
yes,
you always have a daughter that says to a mother, you're forgetting things, you're stupid. And Coille thought, well, maybe I am. And she went to a neurologist and got tested. And the neurologist said, no, you're fine. You're fine. But a few years later, when her daughter said, you're really forgetting things, Mom, she went back and the baseline was very different. They had a baseline to look at. But one of the interesting things that Coille did was she made her living from her work. Occasionally taught, but she really made her living from her work. And she was single for a long time and a single mother with 2 kids. And she used to have studio sales. And one time, little Molly, who's now in her 50s, but little Molly made some little Christmas ornaments with Coille, and they put them on a tree at a sale. And Coille sales used to be usually 2 weekends in December. And all people came in and they bought pots and stuff, but they bought all the ornaments off the tree the first weekend. So Coille got Molly and all her little friends to come in and make more ornaments so they could have more ornaments for the tree. And that later developed into a business, kind of what people now call a side hustle, but it was a main hustle. She really formed a business, and she produced Christmas tree ornaments. And later on, they spread and the business evolved. But this was the beginning of the business. Through a marketing person from Macy's who worked with her and gave her a show in the San Francisco Macy's, in a gorgeous place, and you can see all of the work. But she started selling the porcelain ornaments at this show, and she also went around to different museums, and like the Met in New York, and she found a couple of pieces in their collection. And she made molds off of some of them, or she just reproduced them, and then they sold them in their gift shop. And it became quite a business for her, enough that she lived in Berkeley. She supported her children. She put them through college. She put Matthew through college, and she just took care of herself. So it was a different way of an artist figuring out a way to make it. Later on, she and Molly went into business for real and called it Hooven and Hooven. And just recently, Molly closed the business. But it was just another way of being an artist that I thought I'd just bring up and tell you about. So, Farrell, back to you.
Okay. No, I love that. I appreciate that, because that was definitely part of the archive process, was bringing all that material forward and putting it in some substantial way, because there was so much product that Coille designed. So to get, and she had stacks of the material. So we had to break that down. There were catalogs for these sales. So all those catalogs were saved and put into notebooks. So I've got a small audio here. So this is a short excerpt from an interview that Coille did with Ken Trapp. Ken Trapp was a curator at the Cincinnati Art Museum that Coille knew. And these cassette tapes will be going to the Archives of American Art. We had them transcribed, and then we have them done digitally, and I've edited out this excerpt. I hope you don't mind. It's 1 minute and 15 seconds, but I wanted Coille's voice.
More from you about living in Berkeley in the 70s.
Options didn't feel terrifying then. I mean, the choice to come here was the terrifying choice. But once here, there was a sense of everyone trying to work out their lives in a way that was meaningful to them. So that was the internal process. And people, for me, it was about my internal growth. I had found what I wanted to do. Clay, there was just no question about it. Clay was it.
Now, were you always drawn to porcelain?
No, I just started with clay. People were using stoneware when in college. And I took a lot of art classes, and when I hit clay, I said, this is it. I know this is it. There was never been a question.
Well, this is a question I like to ask artists who are working in the craft materials. What is it about clay that you find appealing?
It is so immediate in its response. There's nothing filtered. You don't have to weld it. You don't have to paint, you know, it's right there. It's the tactile, and what you see is what you get.
So the other reason I wanted to introduce this audio is the importance of an artist being interviewed or sitting down and making comments, making some kind of verbal, either on video or on a tape recorder or on your phone. But that's an important part of your story, is for your voice to be telling your story. So that's the reason I wanted to play that, because it makes a difference. Instead of somebody else writing your story and somebody else verbalizing your story, your voice is extremely important. The one thing about Coille that she just commented on was that she made a lot of art. She took a lot of art classes in college. So there were 2 bronze pieces that she made. Molly and Matthew each have the 2 pieces that she made. And so I thought that was an important aspect of it. And then the other is that she made a sterling silver necklace with vintage glass. This piece was entered into the 1962 Young Americans show at the Museum of Contemporary Art, which later became MAD. So Coille had this in a drawer in her office, and she often pulled it out. And I kept saying, what is that beautiful piece? Finally, I just said, no, seriously, what is that beautiful piece? She told me the story. And then when the retrospective happened at the Museum of Arts and Design, she decided to donate it. It is now in their permanent collection due to it being in the 1962 show. That was Coille's first technically group show. David Shaner was her teacher and mentor at the time, and he was the one that encouraged her to enter the show. Matthew, her son in high school, would often take photographs of her for her open studio posters, and they just became such a hit. And these photographs were used in the MAD exhibition. So here's a representation of one of the items that Marge mentions, where Coille worked with the Met, took their designs and created the ornaments. And then later it became Hooven and Hooven in 1996 with other designs. And that exploded as well with Remembrance and Hospice and just an amazing thriving business. So these are just representations of Coille's pottery, and she was able to support her family. She was known for her handles. Her handles were very famous. And here's Coille. I believe this might have been the time where the retrospective had been accepted and she still had all this material that needed to be sold. And she didn't want it to go because of her dementia. She was hiding pieces. If she knew it was going to be sold, she would hide it. And so I then created, well, you might recognize this, Marge.
Yes.
I believe you have this piece now.
Yes.
This was in Coille's private collection, and she never wanted it to go anywhere. So Marge was the perfect person for it to go home to. So I created on Coille's website a product page where she started to sell things. So when the retrospective happened, it was 2000, I believe, 15, when we mailed one of her books to the director at MAD, who then passed it on to Shannon Stratton, and she came to the house. And at that time, Coille's website, she didn't feel had enough oomph. I don't remember the exact term she used. So we redesigned the website, and I was the catalyst for that. And then we started the product page. So, oops. So I would take photographs of both sides, and it was all the inventory that you saw on that table, plus additional items. Oh, this is a little back history. Sorry, I just kind of like the puppet. Coille had a lot of residencies. We made sure we documented the residencies and the material from the residencies. So then in turn, Coille digitized the 5-minute interview that she had at Kohler back in 1979, and we created a Vimeo and a YouTube page. And that was all fine-tuned and then put on those pages. And that then had a connection and a link directly to her website. So people could, there is a section on her website that has videos. So there's that video. I believe there's a LACMA video. And I believe we digitized the residency for the Western Potters at the Purple Sands factory. And then the Deruta residency, Coille didn't have any interviews, but she had a huge stack of slides. I then took those slides and I made a short film. I edited it down, and then I hired somebody to read the historical sort of transcript that came off their website of the factory as background to this slideshow. And then we were good. I was hoping to get Coille to tell some of her story around the Deruta residency, but we never got to it. I never got her voice for that. But we still have this short film. I'm not showing it. We just have the film. So these are the pieces that she produced from Deruta. And this work I have, and I'm actually going to try and contact Deruta and see if they want the pieces back as historical reference to an artist that was in their residency program in the early 90s. This is Coille at the I Ching factory. I was in digging through Coille's archive. I was able to discover the single snapshot of the 5-6 original pieces that she made. 2 only survived. 1 is at the Smithsonian and 1 is at LACMA. but we found that photograph, and it was really important that that photograph be found. And then these smaller pots were test pots for her. So that story is important. And this was the first time Western potters were allowed in the factory in 1996. And this is just a great piece. This is in the CAM collection. And I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to go just a few minutes faster, just to show the work. And as we go forward, pieces, this is the final piece that got into the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And that was a team effort. When the retrospective happened, we kind of turned into Team Coille, where I would sit down and have meetings with the family because Coille was not able to make some of the final decisions. So we really became a team, and we would always say Team Coille, Team Coille. This is a photo of Coille with the final 30 binders that are now going to the Archives of American Art. And she's holding the final edition of her book, the blurb book that she published. And I then put the blurb book on as a PDF download right before the retrospective so that people could get it on their mobile device during the exhibition or before the exhibition. That was something that was not available prior. And then we also put it on Amazon. And that was something I did. I ended up editing the second edition and placed which institutions had received pieces. So this is Coille and Molly meeting with Shannon Stratton at the house. And then we go, that's the piece they're looking at, ended up at the Racine. And then we go into the retrospective. And I'll just click through this. So all these pieces, with the exception of maybe 7, 8, were at the house. This is a review from the show. So the MAD did an amazing job in sending out PR for Coille, and she got some incredible reviews. And I constantly was doing research. I was constantly doing hashtag searches on Instagram and Facebook to pull up anything that was out there. I found somebody in Hong Kong had done a blog. So I pulled that off, created a PDF, and that now is on Coille's website. So all that material is out there. Then we had the flash mob that I coordinated in honor of Famous Female Artists Symposium that Coille presented along with a number of other female ceramicists in 1991, the gender factor. So in honor of that 1991 project, Peter reissued the Famous Female Artist t-shirt that Marge is sitting in, an original edition. So he reissued it for this flash mob that we literally scheduled and managed to facilitate in 24 hours. And here's the end result. And we presented to the museum an A grade because 75% of the museum's exhibitions during her stint were female artists. So it was quite remarkable. Then I made sure that Coille had imagery of her pieces as they were going out, because she often referred to her work as, these are my babies, these are my babies, you know, take care of them. So she wanted to walk out with them. She wanted to be part of the process. And then we had the Coille Hooven Day, and this is going back to the banners that I mentioned. So it was Coille Hooven Day. Some of you who are here from Berkeley might remember this. So these are the 4 banners that were made for the parade that happened. And these were also later used at the Monterey Museum of Art, one of Coille's last solo shows. And here's the parade. And once again, there were t-shirts left over from the MAD, so the t-shirts were worn. And then we have Dancing for the Moon. And in this instance, I ended up curating the show because the curator at the museum left. That was not something I normally do. I'm there to pull material together on an artist's behalf for a curator or a journalist or a historian. So with this specific show, I wanted to have Coille's whimsical storytelling. And we asked Ted Cohen to design the show. He was semi-retired at the time. He knew Coille. I had worked with Ted at the San Francisco Craft and Folk Art Museum back in the 80s and 90s. And he agreed. And he said he did it for Coille. So it was amazing. And then I contracted out and had the pedestals. We delivered the pedestals. We delivered the show. I packed the show. And here's Coille the day before. So we spent weeks packing the show. So, and then we had to produce a zine. That was one of the requirements of Coille doing this show. And so with her cognitive issues, she wasn't necessarily remembering what was happening at the time. So there were parts of this that she may not have known were happening behind the scenes. So these are her drawings and her doodles that we put together. And this is the name of the show. We found this doodle and it's Dancing for the Moon. So that's what we named the show. And here's Coille's press page where I put all of the press information that I found over the years. And then the piece that is in the background here was just donated to the Crocker. And Rosebud. And thank you to Coille, Team Coille, for all your love and support. Thank you to Marge and SOLA for inviting me to this conversation. I'm honored. And then I've got photography credits that are very important to somebody's archive. And then we can't leave without Coille being the last one in the room.
I just would like to show my shirt. Okay. From all of that time ago, from 1991. But, you know, this is a time where all of you can unmute yourself. And if you would like to, well, how are we going to handle any questions?
I would love it if you would put your questions in the chat so I can manage that. It's always difficult to figure out who goes first if we just start talking all at once.
I just, while you're putting your questions or whatever in the chat, Farrell, I don't know whether you know it, but as part of the award for the SOLA Award, we now make a video of the artist who's received the award, and we call it a spotlight video. And we have a professional videographer go and we arrange, you know, the questions, and we do it in the studio and we show the work and all of that, because many of the artists who are really outstanding do not have a video in their own voice. So that's a big part of the award as it has evolved.
Thank you.
We find more and more that it is essential, this video thing, but you have gone through so much, Farrell, with the family and Coille in all of these years. I mean, I just started taking notes of all of the different titles that one might have. There's archivist and researcher, marketer, publisher, web designer, photographer, filmmaker, curator, and I wrote carer. I think you know what that means. What do you think, if someone wanted to get into this work, you know, what are some of the most important aspects that you could highlight to help someone move forward, or what should they be aware of?
So Are you talking about someone in my position coming in, or are you talking about an artist and what would be priority for them?
Actually, I had a two-part question. So if you'd like to answer either of those lenses for us, maybe from your perspective, someone who does your kind of work first, and then talk about the artist that wants to do it.
Well,
Whichever you prefer.
I feel that you really just need to step into the space of an artist and find out exactly what they want. You really have to be able to listen. There was an artist that I worked with for a brief period of time, and they had never had an assistant or anyone in their space before. And so for me, my response, without saying anything to them, I never spoke unless I was spoken to. That could have gone on for days where I was silent for hours. I took my shoes off so they couldn't hear me walking around. I made sure that the angle of the desk was never in their line of sight. So it's really stepping into the space and listening and having foresight and being aware of what the artist is really wanting and what is the goal and how can you lightly step into that without taking over.
Beautiful. Amazing. You are a unique individual. We're all very lucky that you're here to share this with us. And then from the perspective of an artist, what would that lens look like? Someone who wanted to get into this work with an archivist.
I would say basically allow us in the room, be available for what you want and try and prioritize. Because if you're dealing with a health issue, if you're wanting to prioritize for family, who are you doing this for? Because there's a lot of people in the space with a closet full of artwork and they're so overwhelmed that they just want to throw it all in the garbage. Try and understand if that's really a solution or if it's just anxiety. So what is your priority? And if specifically, if there is a health issue, that there needs to be, motion forward immediately. And so in terms of end of career doula, that was another thing that I work with is be sure you have a post form on your refrigerator. Especially if you're living alone, make sure there's a post form with instructions, do not resuscitate. Where do you stand with that as an artist? Try and find those answers for yourself. Be sure that emergency contacts are on your phone. And these are not necessarily artist related, they're life related as well. But I find that not everybody has that equation set in place yet. Be sure emergency contacts are set up in your phone, especially if your phone is locked and you need a password. That little emergency contact down at the bottom, we're going to click on that when there's an emergency, and I hope to find who I'm going to call. I hope to find your medical information because it's going to be pertinent to how you're cared for as you go forward. Be sure if you've got advanced directives in place as to who you want to have care for you. Do you have your power of attorney set in place? It's all those little things to map out. So that's a little bit off from what the conversation, but it's all part of the same umbrella. So those are specifics that can be managed, but just prioritize, really prioritize.
Beautiful.
I have tried doing this a little bit for myself, for the artist part of me, and in some cases, taking a small bite and a chunk to try to make it start happening seems to me to be a good way to do it. And whether the small chunk is the appetizer or the dessert or a little treat passed at a party, whatever it is, try to grab yourself around a little piece and don't get too overwhelmed by the whole picture because it eventually will fall in place. I don't know. I mean, you worked with Coille and the family, and you're still working with the family and the project. Um, did you work full-time or did you work part-time? How did you arrange your life to be your doula artist life?
I'm going to add on to that question. There's someone in the chat that has asked, this sounds like it was years of work and multiple people involved. Did Coille or her family fund the work, or did you or other people apply for grant support? So that sort of ties into the same question, and maybe.
No, this was all funded by the family. The family paid for it, and then there was a hope on Peter's side, because there was so much product still in the studio, that he was wanting to ramp up sales and let's get this going. So before the retrospective, Leslie Farron agreed to represent Coille. And I think that was 2014, 2000, I can't recall. It was right before the retrospective when Matt said yes. So sales came out of that through Leslie, and it was fantastic. And then with the website and the pottery. And so it was all funded. And Marge, you asked me at one point, what was, what's the ratio? What are the margins? And they're pretty close to even from what came in and what went out. The family supported the Mad Show with about $30,000. And that included admin, and that included travel expenses to and from the show, things like that. They didn't pay for the show to travel. That was their expenses for family. We all went, we were there for a week. We had a flash mob, so there was that part of it for Peter and the family, that we put product up for sale. And I pushed the prices if I could, and then I would just say that I had other clients at the time of working with Coille, so I had to offset those days, hours, however I could. But the focus, when the retrospective happened, I really committed to that, because when we met with the curator, she was here in the spring, and then it was a show in the fall, which is unheard of. And I begged and begged and begged and said, I will do anything. What can I do? I will help facilitate. So then the hours built up in that summer. So I was there quite a bit.
But it was a very holistic process. I remember at some point you lived in the guest room, which formerly had been called Marge's room.
Yes.
Until it was your guest room.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, because it was intense. Yes. Because they had strict deadlines. So on top of facilitating whatever else was going on at the time, to get the website up, to get this up, I had to be personally engaged with the material constantly, so I was referring to notebooks and pulling things out and sharing things with the curator or administrators or whoever.
Nicole, do we have any more questions in the chat? Because we're getting to the end of our program.
Thank you, Marge. Yeah, there is one more, and I've hesitated because I'm not sure I understand it fully, but I'm going to read it, and maybe it makes sense to you more than me. And what is the place or need of creating an inventory of an artist's work? Rely on catalogs or make catalogs? Does that make sense?
No, who asked the question?
Joan, do you want to unmute Joan Rudd? Can you unmute and just ask your question live for us?
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So somebody told me that no one will take you seriously unless you have an inventory of your work. So I have made an inventory of my work, and it's not entirely clear to me now what it is good for, except to edit it and decide, okay, among these 500 individual drawings and sculptures and ceramic things, what are my 40 best things? And that will be my catalog raisonné. I observed that some of the important artists that we still know about made their own selection, or their dealers made a selection of about 40 to 50 pieces as their really important stuff. So it was a lot of trouble to make this inventory. I give myself some credit for finishing it, but what was it really needed, and what am I going to do with it? Or if a historian came along, would they rely on that, or would they rely on catalogs of shows or lists of which pieces were exhibited in which shows? Or I could use my inventory to make catalogs without having more shows, just as I said, picking myself, curating myself, which I think are the strongest works. You didn't mention anything about inventorying in your, she was very prolific, so I don't know that you could have done it.
No, we did do it. We did catalog everything. And one of the things about cataloging is you want to be sure that in your cataloging, you have a history of the piece in exhibition. You have a history of the piece in publication. You have the history of the piece in use in ephemera. You have the history of the piece if it was published in a review. So having an object or a piece of art that has a history of any of that will add to its asset as it moves forward. Now, for you, I would suggest you put everything chronologically, your catalog. So put your catalog chronologically, because it's going to show a history of your process and how you went through different phases, different periods. It doesn't matter if you're working in multiple mediums. It needs to be chronological. Then what you need to do is somehow find a writer, a curator, a historian, and they're going to look at your work and they're going to decide what story they want to tell. But you present it to them in a way that shows your timeline and your process and represents some of the history of the object. And if you have a specific quote or an artist statement that can be associated with some of the stronger work that you have, I would not do my own editing if I were you, the artist. Present your work as a whole. And I will say this, I'm going to do a quick little shout out. I do work with one of the women in Bay Area Women Artist Legacy Project, and they have created books that are based on decades. I don't know if you can see this. It's not showing up. Okay. So they've created books that are based on decades. And it's a wonderful way of going about telling your story. So if decades works for you, or just periods, however you want to break it down, but that's how you're going to be presenting your work to a historian, because every historian, every curator is going to have a different story that they're going to want to tell about your work. The approach is very different today in terms of artists and outreach and seeking representation and seeking museums. And it's extremely different, and it's very hard. And it takes time.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And I will say this, please do not forget, in this process of the business side of it, continue to satisfy your inner self with immediate gratification of your art, because it will get frustrating, this other side of it. I'm an artist myself, so I understand it.
Thank you so much for that great question. Thank you for clarifying, Joan.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah, thank you, Farrol. So we have a little bit over time. We've gone just a little bit over. I put in the chat, and I will follow up. Our next newsletter will have a recording of this wonderful event. Thank you so much, Farrol and Marge, for being a part of this great conversation today. And I'll also put some links in. One of the aspects that SOLA is expanding beyond that $77,000 that we are giving out, and every year it's growing at least $20,000 a year to new artists, is we are doing professional development specifically focused on the mature woman artist. We have created a publication that is free on our website. It is alongside the Joan Mitchell Foundation Guide for Career and Career Documentation and Archiving. we are doing professional development community calls such as this, we're also working with networking so that we all can be a community that supports each other in this work and other work as an artist. So in our next newsletter, there will be a link to this recording as well as some of the other materials. And I have also put in the chat, as I mentioned, Farrol's email address and her Athene studio. So she is open. Thank you very much for questions. If there's something today that you didn't get through, or you have questions in the future, there is her email address. And I invite you, each of you, to join us next time on September 19th for our next community call, which is a networking event. These are very popular. It's little breakout rooms where people can talk amongst yourselves, but we do have a focus where you bring a piece of art that is at least 10 years old, if not older. So we're looking for the mature artists to gather together and share at least one piece that's 10 years old or older. And we encourage you to participate. There's also a link, thank you, Rebecca, to the Bay Area Women Artists Legacy Project. All of this will be in our next newsletter. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Farrol. Thank you, Marge. This has been incredible. You're welcome to unmute and give your thanks as we head out today, if you'd like.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thanks,
Kelly.
everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.